On the show today, we're joined by Merill. Hi, Merill. Welcome to the show.
Hey, hi folks. I'm really happy and excited to be here to talk about all things M365 and Entra.
So, Merill, full name, Merill Fernando. You work at Microsoft, and let me make sure I've got this right. You're a principal product manager for EntraID.
Yes, that's right.
And if you were to look at some of the stuff you publish on the internet, people would think that you are a Microsoft MVP or similar because you are super, super active in communities, GitHub, your blogs, everything really.
All your
In
side
fact,
projects.
yeah.
So what's your secret? How do you stay so young, and how do you keep so much energy? That's really what this podcast is about today. Is about health and wellness.
That's exactly what Rich said beforehand, actually. But yeah, tell us a bit about you're so much more than obviously just principal product manager for EntraID, which is a massively important title in itself. But try to tell us a little bit more about what you do, what that job title means, but also a bit of the stuff that you're passionate about as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've gone through various stages in my career. Started as a dev. I love building things, creating things, and sharing with people. And I love community, the power of the community, and being able to scale out and help each other, learn from each other. Because with the whole of M365, it's so varied. Just talking about Microsoft 365, so many skills from data to security to collaboration. Like it's everything, right? And there is only so much one person can learn just by trying and doing things on their own. And I feel the community and the bubbling up of important news, it's a super impactful way to stay on top of things, which is really hard with all of the changes coming. When I first applied, not yeah, applied for my job, someone was trying to convince me to join Microsoft for this role that I'm in, my manager, and I was like, isn't Entra Azure AD at that time? Isn't that just a login screen? Like what is the work that you have? Like what do you need to do so much?
Why do you need a product manager?
Exactly. So and then it was like the joke's more on me because I do this weekly Entra newsletter where every week you'd think there wouldn't be like for Entra there wouldn't be so much news, but there's at least like one new announcement from the product team, and then there's so many like articles and posts and videos that people share just only around Entra ID. And so my day job is to help a few large customers. The org that I'm in, the role we are in, is to help these really big, large customers that have hundreds and thousands of users, and they have lots of special needs, and we want to make sure that Entra works for them for their needs to secure the organization. The name Entra is, you are the entryway to all of Microsoft 365 Cloud, whether it's M365, Azure, any of the services that Microsoft hosts. So my day job is that to help just handful of my customers. But then when they ask me questions and I don't know the answer all the time, I need to go back to the feature PMs,
Yeah.
look it up.
Yep.
And then when I do find the answer and share it with them, and I'm like, I'm just helping one person. Like I'm sure there are 10 more at least, or there's at least one more person who would find this useful. And then it just takes me a little bit more effort to share that out. And so I just started sharing that on Twitter and LinkedIn. And people think like I'm doing this really, crazy thing, but each one of us learns something new every day. And if you share that and just make it simple, there's so much from a personal thing, personal branding, and it's the helping of others. Others will just amplify that message, and then you can just find the niche of people in your community and be able to help a lot more people. And these days when you write a blog post or post on YouTube, they stay for a long time. People will find that content and it becomes so much useful for everyone. So yeah, so that's how things start, and I share things. Then sometimes I find some gaps, and I like to build code things. So I do that, and then there's so many people who are smarter than me, so I try to reach out to a few people and say, hey, this doesn't exist. Why don't we build and create this? And we just start hacking together and end up with lots of interesting projects and tools and utilities.
So do you find then there's a difference between the folk that you're helping? Because as your enterprise customers, you might be working, I suppose, with people that their life is about identity, and maybe it's been EntraID for the last, well, pretty much 10 years. And then some of the people that might be reading this site or your blogs will be that it's one of a few things that they juggle, and they'd like to be able to get it right because it's super important. They're also looking after an accounting system and virtualization, Azure. What's the difference? That in what you could do between the big sort of powerful customer that's spending millions and millions a year with Microsoft and the person who's reading your blog who is trying to stay afloat. It's probably sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. So surprisingly, when it comes to identity, it's not as complex. Like some of the needs and so on are sort of very similar. They just do it at a different scale, right? But these are like most of the folks I work with, they are like dedicated identity. They are called identity and access management teams, and sometimes they have a whole team of people whose only the portal they go to is EntraID. Like they don't access any of the M365 portals, which might be a surprise to a lot of the folks who are listening here, especially if you are not at that scale. But some have like big teams, like maybe even 10 odd people who just focus on one thing. So it could be an Entra, maybe they just focus on apps. Enterprise orgs are always adding new applications. They need to vet them, assess the security, add them in, manage the permissions. So they'll split out the roles between app and governance and user management. And this is on top of the level 1, level 2 help desk folks who do standard things like password resets and the person can't sign in without the MFA. So these folks are dedicated, but I find that they have the questions they have, like, hey, we did this SSPR and we have this hybrid sync, and do you know when it gets updated? Because sometimes there's a delay when they change on-prem versus the cloud, and then I try to find out because it's not really documented, and I learn the whole story of why it works that way. And then what I really like to do is make it all visual. So that's where I can take something really, really even complex and make it into sort of a really short visual.
You seem to
We're
enjoy
living
it.
this new, yes, yeah. We're living in this TikTok world, and scrolling through, and
I mean, yeah,
be
it's the perfect way to communicate in the medium that you're using. I mean, like it's right there. It's a burst of color and burst and information, and it's short, and it's in the space that fits.
yes, you can find
It works for some people, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What was
Yes,
that, Steve?
exactly.
Oh, sorry.
So for some people, yeah, that's their preferred way. I think, when I'm learning about stuff, I'll see there's a YouTube video on it or a short article, and I'd rather just scroll through the short article or look at the GitHub repo or something like that, and I'll be done. I don't need to watch a 10-minute video. But for some people, that's just how they consume stuff. Because I'll be sitting next to my wife and she'll be watching stuff on TikTok at like double speed. So imagine your videos, there's people sitting at home watching them like double speed. You're there talking really, really fast. If she was watching one up, you go, I know she watches them double speed, but I can't help it. I just have to say, is that person talking really fast again? It's like a dad joke. She just glares at me.
We can't help it. Can't help it.
Yeah, there's a whole generation who just consume information. They learn that way now, right? So like in 60 seconds, you need to be able to share some knowledge. So like the visuals I do on LinkedIn and so like Twitter and other media now is just that, like, how can I give them some knowledge in 60 seconds? Like you look at the image and you get the gist of what it is. And most of the time you just file it away in your head, right? Like people will bookmark it.
Drip
Compared to
feeding.
reading, yes, yeah, like they don't have time to read so many blog posts about so many things, especially with just EntraID, which might be just a small part of the overall thing. But things like password resets are really common, like knowing how it works in M365, and what are the different types of authentication methods. So my most popular one, the posts I've made are around like how does SSO work, and I have this visual for like on a macOS how it works, and that's one of my more popular, like the clips, because reading an article on that would be like a 3-4
Yeah.
page article of
Yep.
SSO
Of
and
really boring stuff.
People do say, if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And it sounds like you enjoy getting into the little nitty gritty of the detail and understanding exactly how it all works, and then boiling it down into a great explanation.
Absolutely, exactly. That's what I do, and people like seem to like that way. And like a lot of us who are visual learners, and even myself, you can remember a picture or an image more easily and be able to recall it than the 101st blog post that you read.
Yeah.
For sure. No doubt.
So you mentioned Ignite on this week, and there's a lot of EntraID sessions that are obviously there's going to be new announcements, or there are new announcements this week, and there's a lot of sessions, obviously around securing access, and making sure that people are moving towards zero trust, passwordless security co-pilots, and so on. What are some of the things that people should be aware of going forward that is worth then going and looking through the session catalogs and the blog posts, which I'll link to from the Entra team that shows all of the list of the sessions? What's the one thing that if they didn't watch some of that stuff, and they wanted the boiled down simple version of something really important that they should know about, is there anything you've got for us? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes. So the session's out. So there are 2 sessions I would really recommend for on the Entra side that folks should go and watch. There is one called Securing Access for Any Identity to Any Resource.
Yep.
And that has Alex Simmons, who's our VP or CVP for all of identity. So it's sort of like the keynote for Entra. So he'll cover a lot of things and what's coming. So it's more like a general session. People are been really excited about like passkeys and zero trust and so on. So, that session, if you want to do like just one session on Entra, that would be the one that you should attend.
And that's Breakout 313 Wednesday to watch online or see in person at 1:15 Central Time.
Correct. Yeah, that's 313, and these are all recorded and they're free. Yeah. So even if it's you're listening to this a week or 2 later, you can go in there and watch. Watch this session. It's 313. So if you want just a really quick overview of everything, where Entra is, and what the roadmap might look like, that would be like the one session I would say you should go to. If you are looking at like security and cloud, VPN, and maybe you want to secure things for access to on-prem services and so on, and be able to apply MFA. And there's some really good announcements coming as well around zero trust and network access. We just recently launched Microsoft Global Secure Access, which is like a cloud VPN sort of a replacement. And for the first time, you can apply MFA and like conditional access to on-prem apps and services. So there is a really key announcement coming. So you should watch that around like licensing and some new things that you get without having to pay anything more. So keep an eye out on that.
So now, some people like my colleagues at work. There's a team that are all over global secure access, but for those that don't know a lot about it, because some of my customers, especially in the mid-market, will be immersed in other vendors' products from Cloudflare and others, and different types of mesh-style VPN that have become quite popular, especially in the smaller mid-market customers where they're cloud-based tools. So they're basically like WireGuard, but wrapped up in a nice, pretty layer, and sort of Tailscale, I think, is one of them. What's global secure access compared to other products on the market? Which one is it most similar to?
Yes, yeah. So really good question. So this is our newest service or product that we launched in the last year, and there are 2 parts to it. There is one called Entra Private Access and Entra Internet Access. So Entra Private Access lets you access any of your on-prem applications, whether it is some like a thick client, like SAP client, that's only available over there on the local VPN network. You can't access it over the internet, or it could be any web application. So with Entra Private Access, you deploy these small agents. Right now, there's an additional agent you deploy onto your Windows and your mobile devices and macOS as well. In the future, some of those will be like baked into Windows. But with these agents, you will be able to then, someone who's at home doesn't need to connect to like a VPN. It's sort of like a cloud VPN. You don't need to install VPN software, just like Zscaler or Tailscale. You don't need to install anything on your servers or the backend, but folks from home can just sign in and connect to those on-prem applications. Now, the neat thing that Entra does on top of just being able to access is admins can apply conditional access. So you get this really powerful policy engine, and you can apply that to accessing anything on-prem. And those apps don't need to be aware of it. So a really easy one is MFA, right? And to get your insurance, or there are various regulations where you need to now do MFA even for on-prem applications. Now, usually it meant you need to uplift that app, you need to recode it, make it integrated with Entra, or do something to make it MFA capable. With private access, it blocks the user from accessing that application until all the conditional access policies are met. So as an admin, you now don't need to worry a lot about all these different apps that are on-prem, legacy apps. It's all good. You can just create a CA policy in the cloud, and this engine will enforce it. You can do even powerful things like not just standard MFA. You can use like phishing resistant MFA. You can say you only need to use a FIDO2 key for certain critical applications. Then you get the full power of the conditional access that you can apply there. So network location and all of that. So that is the interesting twist that EntraID brings in. And as with all things Microsoft, we try to simplify things. You don't need to have a team of network access folks. Like usually this would be things like big enterprises would deploy and so on. We sort of democratize a lot of these things, right? And make it really easy for people to manage and deploy it across the org. So it's ideal for a lot of the folks who don't have those dedicated network specialists and those teams. And even the networking teams, they love it now, because you couldn't do something like this before. You had put together different solutions, integrate with IDPs, and just hack something. Even to do a simple thing as an MF would be a 3-6 month project. Now you can just do those things in days with conditional access. So that's private access. We also have internet access, which is you're accessing any SaaS application. You can define the same conditional access rules. You can say some people can access this, so others can access the different apps, and they don't need to be integrated with EntraID. You can apply web content filtering and so on. So it's a new way to bring things into the identity sort of space in Entra.
Well, speaking of conditional access, one of the reasons we brought you on here is to talk about one of your side projects, Maester.dev. And that is one of the features in your, I don't know if we want to call it a project. I don't know, a product, I don't know what to call it. It's very interesting, but one of the features is a what if for conditional access. And I've heard this directly from customers regarding conditional access. It's similar to GPOs, the touch a GPO and understand how it's going to affect something downstream. Now the same fear exists with conditional access. So a what if engine seems powerful, and it seems like it should be in the product. So how's that happen?
Yeah, so great questions. Identity is the new control plane, right? Like as we saw now, even network access is built into Entra, and you have this new control plane because people are no longer sitting inside a network, right? In the olden days, you would say, when I say olden days, you would say you need to come into the office,
years
right?
ago.
That's the only way to get to work.
Ironically, if you're working for Amazon Web Services, you would be. They don't need none of this. Well, we laugh, but probably any of us could find out that some corporate person has decided this in any org. So I'm not laughing at the AWS people, but The
Yeah,
irony of, but
yeah, that's true.
this doesn't even look like a side project to me.
I know it doesn't. It looks like a full product.
Yeah, I put together a lot of stuff in my spare time, and so my question is: do you do all the design yourself, or do you get other people to help you with it, or because it looks very, very good?
Let's back up a second for our audience.
It's
Merill,
absolutely.
Why don't you explain what it is, Maester.dev?
Yes, yeah.
And what round of funding is it in?
Yeah, so I'm a dev and a DevOps person. I managed a large Microsoft 365 tenant in Australia, one of the very first ones that went to the cloud back in 2014 was when we created the tenant. So it's like 10 years old. And I come from a dev background where I used to build things, and for some reason or other, I was made the M365 lead as we were moving things into the cloud, like Exchange mailboxes and so on. And in my past life as a DevOps and enterprise architect, the whole idea of people and admins going and clicking on things in production is no, right? Like you don't let people go and click and make changes in production for apps that you build. We say, no human should touch it. It should all be scripted, and the scripts would automate it because you would test it in a test tenant and the prod tenant. So when you're really managing large tenants, it becomes really important to make sure you have that process, because you don't want someone going in and doing a change and suddenly 80,000 or 100,000 people can't now sign in to do their work on the day, and you have this emergency. So we try to reduce the risk or the chance of that happening. So I've always had this thing to do like DevOps and DevOps practices. Even when I walked into M365, it used to be really hard before. Microsoft didn't have APIs, and the PowerShell modules will always be lagging behind and so on. It was very painful before. So most people didn't do it. So even those who did do DevOps would just give up and do ClickOps, right? You write down the steps and then you just follow the steps and click on that. So that's my background. And what I found is with identity as a new control plane in Entra and M365, the conditional access policies are the ones that define the control, like how someone should access, what they should do. And as you add, you might start simple, but very soon you'll now have like 20, 30, 40 policies. And now you're really scared about, what you're going to change and how all that fits in together with something else. And what more happens is people move, right? Like you work, you're an admin here today, you move on, and then the new person coming in has no idea what these policies do, right? And he doesn't know, like, if I change this, will it affect something the person did before? And even if you are the admin, you would forget, right? Like a year down the line, what was I thinking when I created this policy? And however much you try to document things, they just
I'll give you an example.
Never in sync.
I've documented some things. Sorry.
I had something the other day where one of our technical account managers said one of the customers that they manage, their contractors are bypassing the conditional access policy somehow. And it's not supposed to be like that. And obviously, one, I'm not going to suggest they make any changes off the back of not knowing how it's configured. And two, how did that happen? What was it always like that or not? Was it meant to be like that? Did someone intend it to be that way? Well, regardless of their answers to that, like if you don't know the answers to this, or you take over an environment and it looks okay, and you're not sure how it's put together, you don't want to make changes that could accidentally affect lots and lots of people, and you also don't want to leave a hole either.
Exactly. And that's how this idea for Maester came about. So the exact same story. I was helping a customer and they had assigned a policy for a group, and they thought this policy, their business policy, was being applied. But someone went and either deleted the group or they just removed a whole bunch of people from the group. They didn't know that group was being used for the CA policy. It was like a group for something else. And for a year, that group of people, like it was bypassed, right? Like no policy was being applied to them.
Yes.
And they were happy, right?
Like, I think that's the scenario that the contractors are just using Outlook on their own machines. They're not supposed to be able to do that. Was basically and obviously that this had been that obviously was the we were solving for the customer. But conditional access policies can be hard like that, can't they? I like that that you said you worked on the customer side. You're the Microsoft 365 product owner or responsible for it, and you also have that dev background. So you see a problem, you see there's not the tool for it, and then you're building out a necessity, which doesn't necessarily make products that are 100% going to make you a millionaire, but they're products that are going to be useful to somebody else. And there's long time listeners to the show know Alan Byrne. Do you know Alan Byrne, Rich?
No, I don't think so.
Have you heard of Quadratech Nova?
Oh, yeah.
The Quest product now,
Yes.
which was Cogmotive. And
Yes.
Cogmotive, this monitoring tool for Office 365, came out of that same need. Alan was working as a contractor at a big UK telecommunications company and built this thing out of need for same sort of reasons. Really, just like building stuff. So I imagine if you don't know, then the pair of you would probably sit down and have some interesting chats.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I love PowerShell as well. And so what we did with Maester is I reached out to a few MVPs, Fabian in Germany, and then later with Thomas. He used PowerShell Pester to write some tests for Sentinel. And so I reached out to him and said, look, I'm thinking of conditional access is this big thing and people need a way to test their policies. So even a year down the line, someone comes in and makes a change, just like in development, right? Like you write these unit tests, someone comes, it's like a safety net. If someone comes and makes a change, you run those tests, and if they're all working, gives you some confidence that you didn't really break things or assumptions or the policies that the person created 5 years back or 10 years back. So it's sort of like building a safety net. And with Maester, we wanted to. So everything was there before we did Maester. We just put it all together, made it like an easy intro guide for people who have never done DevOps. Like we don't use the term DevOps even in much of the docs, but it's a gentle introduction to DevOps. We give all the guides on how you can set up the automation yourself. But the key part is you can write your own tests, like it's a PowerShell pester test. So it could be a simple thing like one config that you want to check, or it could be a whole sort of policy to say, maybe like I have the example in the docs, like SharePoint should have MFA enforced. And then you can make sure there's always this policy that has MFA enforced for SharePoint. And you can put that in a test. And because it's DevOps, you can just have the test run daily. So you just set up the automation. It runs daily. The moment someone goes and makes a change in the tenant that moves away from the policy, then those tests will fail and you'll know, right, something happened in the environment. I'll need to go figure it out. It might not be the conditional access policy itself. It could be a group that someone deleted or some other dependency for conditional access. So there's no one size fits all. That's why it's more like a DevOps tool, because each company will have their own policy on like what they want to do, which apps they target. So it's more around that need. It's not something that could easily be built into the product. Like the product you'll have a whole monitoring solution then. So this is more to create that practice and a gentle introduction. It's going to be hard for like small businesses to do something like this. So the initial focus, I would say, is more like the slightly bigger orgs. But we made it so easy. Like a lot of people do this. There are like 200 odd checks now. People have taken this and added the CISA tests, the SIS tests. There are all the different frameworks. So you can just do a one-time, they just run it, and 10 minutes later you get a nice report that says, hey, this is how your tenant, it's passing these checks, it's failing these. And you can, so now it's like a lot of people use it just for one time, but you get the real value if you like set up and monitor it daily.
It occurs to me that it's probably quite useful with co-pilots that help an administrator make changes. If you've used any of the recent modern coding assistants like Klein or Ada, they can break your code very, very badly. They can make a little Tetris game or a JavaScript game, but if you put it onto your code base that's in any way complex at all, then they're not considering the impact of changing this one thing here all the way over there.
It doesn't know. Yeah.
Which I know the Microsoft stuff, when it's a Copilot built into, say, the Entra portal, there's some level of intelligence of what it's in. It's got the context, right? But there is obviously that worry that I imagine an enterprise customer would have, where it's got a team of people who know all this extremely well and are probably also know a lot about AI, as the business has been asking for it, and will be worried about things like that a change made by AI might not consider the governance and policies or the business policies that have then driven the security policies that are then the policy definitions inside the portal when making changes. And on the coding side, you need the tests to be able to say, well, if you make a change, run the unit test, check it's okay, and then undo anything you've done once you've messed it up. But also, you probably need those sort of things in place if you're going to be able to take advantage of automatic remediation by AI.
Yes, yeah, the agentic flows to like have the AI go and do things. I guess I'm sure they'll all come along. Right where we are right now, they don't exist yet, right? So hopefully they'll come around and they'll know. And one of the things with Microsoft is we call it a co-pilot.
Yeah.
And as my VP, we were having a chat yesterday. I'm at a team offsite, and he said lots of customers ask him, I want I want an autopilot that'll just go and, do everything for me, like secure my tenant. But we intentionally call it co-pilot because
Yeah.
you are in control of it. You don't want it to do things without you
Yeah.
really
But
understanding it.
that's the thing, isn't it? Where it might do things, and the person asking it to do the thing, if they don't, that everyone makes mistakes. So regardless of the AI making a mistake and implementing a change to a policy or recommending a change to a policy that impacts somewhere it hasn't seen, there's always that tendency for the person doing it to trust a little bit too much and sort of infer for themselves that, oh, it must have thought of that thing. And that's why, this makes a lot of sense, having these tests against your environment to make sure that you've not opened something up, especially as you say, right, well, now we can delegate some of these tasks. We can let level 2 make a change that would normally have to escalate because we've got the Copilot. The one thing that I'd have thought would stop almost all customers of any size from doing that is, well, we can see that it makes mistakes sometimes. So how are we going to validate that it's not broken something? So I don't, we've got to bring AI into every single conversation. But it just popped into my mind because I was writing something completely different in my spare time and having to put the unit test together for those. So if I was writing it myself, I wouldn't be so fussed. But even for straightforward stuff, if I'm going to let it do a week's worth of perhaps, then it'll take me a week to undo the changes that it's made.
Yes.
So you can see why this applies here as well.
Absolutely. And like we forget, even when we spend hours writing code, a week or month later, we forget how, why is this code like this? And now with
I just
a
wrote
code
it
that
again.
you've not even written, you would like know what you were thinking. Like, what was I thinking when I wanted to ask the agent
Yes.
to do?
So that's a really interesting product. So is it a product or is it an open source tool or is it a bit of both?
It's completely open source. It's a whole community driven. We have like 50, 60 plus contributors. We are shortly going into V1. We launched in March earlier this year, and we want to hit V1 soon. It's completely community driven. We have so many people helping out with the docs. So because it's not important to call out, hey, we configure out of the box settings, this should be turned off by default or turned on. Like a really simple one is the default setting is guests can invite other guests into the tenant. So some people might not be aware that the moment you invite a guest into your tenant, the default config is that guest can invite any other guest into your tenant and share the document. You might not know about that. You might not want it. But the idea is like if you email someone a document, they could email it to anyone else, right? So it's sort of the similar thinking that was in before, but now we are living in this new SFI secure by default world, and you might not want that setting. You might want to have more control. So there are those hardening settings that are there built into Maester that checks. The key is finding that, and then we also give instructions on how you can go, where you need to go, what to fix. And it's all like community driven, writing all those documents and the checks and so on. So that's that's why like it's completely open source. There's zero cost to you. We give you the instructions to run it on GitHub or using the free tier in Azure DevOps. And like this whole monitoring, you can set it up. Just need a few like an hour of your time to set that up once and you're done.
And you said that
It's in PowerShell as well, so it's very.
Yes.
If you couldn't write it yourself, but you can read PowerShell, you can. There's a reasonable amount of code.
Yes.
It's not just open in the but it's open as in the code that you'll run. You don't need to install it as such. You can look at the code as you're running it if you wanted to.
Yeah, the code is all on GitHub. People contribute all the time. They make updates and fixes, or they say, hey, we should think about this, or in my tenant, I have this. And like people come in and submit fixes as well. So there's a huge community that has built in, and they've sort of added so many lots of different tests, things that they were. And the bigger power for this is lots of people were doing this, but they were rebuilding everything from scratch. And now that we made this open source, we've given one place, and we help build on top of each other's work. So we don't need to like recreate things, right? It's there, and you can now come in and add. So that whole community-driven strength of that comes in. For me, Maester is also about writing your own custom tests, because your tenant is really unique. It's not the same as every other tenant. Your business requirements are different. The apps that you use are different. So you can write custom tests, and like I want to help move that industry forward in let's apply these DevSecOps practices for managing your Entra, M365, Exchange, all these tenant and the settings, because there's only so much you can do with ClickOps as you grow, and you don't know what setting is in why you did have such a setting. So start with the most important things for you, and then over time you can like just start with 5 or 10 tests, and then as you do new changes, if it's something really important, you put that in as a test, and you can monitor in that way.
you said the success so far has been with more enterprise size kind of customers that have been downloading and using it and giving you feedback versus the smaller medium size. That's interesting.
Yeah, so the enterprise, correct. The enterprise folks, like they have the dev tenants and test tenants. Yes, yeah, and they do that. A lot of the smaller tenants, because now this is so easy to do, I've heard a lot have started using it. They go like, oh, it just took me half an hour, and I was able to set it up on GitHub on the free tier, or Azure DevOps on the free tier, and then it's just running, and it sends me an email every day, and my boss gets his email, and he's so happy that he knows what are the green ticks and what are the things they need to address.
So what's the future?
They really like the value of that.
What's the future?
So the future is, we are all like based on the community. People have been adding lots of checks. So my goal was just, when I started, was just conditional access. Like that was the only reason we built this for. And people, like folks, have taken it, and they expanded it to all of Entra settings. Then we had Exchange coming in, like Michael Soul has been adding in like Azure tests and sys tests. So we are just working on like whatever the community wants and their need is, and then they want to share it with the rest of the folks. So it's building out that way. We want to do things like being able to track over time. Right now it's just one report. We want to show like, hey, when did this test fail? It was passing all this time, correct? Yeah. When did this fail? So you can look at your previous runs to know, like, was it failing all the time, or did it just start failing, on this day? So we have ideas like that, and hopefully, like, one-click resolutions as well. Like, you don't want to go do all these things to fix it. You want to maybe have a script or something that it generates to say, we found 10 issues. Here's the script to, fix these 10 issues that you can run, and it'll go and fix it either through that. So we have lots of different ideas, but the actual tests for Teams and Exchange and Intune, like that's where I see it'll keep expanding. Like as someone comes in and says, "Hey, I want to do this for Intune. I want to do this for this other product," and it's not even M365. It can be used for any cloud app. Anything that has an API, folks can build tests around it. So for me, this is more about bringing DevOps practices to our SaaS solutions, which we usually just do click stuff,
Yeah.
right? And building this test
Yeah,
framework
I don't know
around
if
it.
you coined it, but it's I think on the website it says security as code. I don't know if I've read
Yes.
that term before, but I'm sure it sounds legit.
Yeah, it's I've heard it mentioned a few times. We have policy as code and so on. So
Yeah,
the focus here is security. Yeah, it's as we move to more SaaS world, this is the thing, right? You have these tenants and you have them like, what's your confidence that the settings you picked or clicked or selected are actually what they are, like 10 days or 10 months or 10 years from now, and were those changes intentional, right? Or did an attacker get in and they've changed it and you didn't know that happened in your tenant?
I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I would imagine that I was just having a look to see whether there were pull requests or someone had forked it or whether it already did it. But this is the kind of thing where I'm looking at it and going, I can imagine that some enterprise customers I've worked with would want to, if they're Microsoft 365 focused, they'd be bringing some of the data in and doing Power BI graphs, things like that. An identity and access team would probably have a dashboard built out the back of this sort of thing to flag things up that would be on a display if they were in an office still, and so on. And is that
Yes.
some of the things that you've heard customers are well, I say customers as in from your Microsoft role, customers are asking for, contributors are suggesting, on the project.
Yeah, so there are lots of we have in the discussions board side, we have lots of ideas that people have shared. Why don't we do this? How can we check for these things? So yeah, there are lots of ideas and there are lots of folks who are jumping in and going, hey, I'll do that and create that idea. For us, there are already like 180 checks. The thing we want to improve on is like maybe have YouTube videos on each one to explain what is this setting, like why is it important? Because someone has written these tests and saying, this should be how you
this,
would do
but
it.
why? Yeah,
The why for, why is it important? So you can learn about it and decide whether that's important for you or not. Because the risk level of different dogs is different. Like there's no one size fits all. If there was, Microsoft would have done it. But it's like ordering pizza for like 1 million or 10 million.
I think this is that's the problem, isn't it? Because if you're a smaller customer or you're a managed service provider managing hundreds of tenants, for your customers in the southwest area or wherever, then yes, you can have some standard policies. But if you're a larger customer with over 1,000 or so employees, up to the largest customers, there's not a product that sort of exists that does it that way, where you can have your own custom fine-grained policies and also get the benefit of some recommendations or change some of those key recommendations that actually the person who is working at that enterprise customer knows their environment so well that, and things go through probably so many committees and change planning that one, they wouldn't put the product into the environment because it would be too generic, and two, they probably know enough about all of that, their context in the business, to be able to change some of those default policies as well, I suppose, to their liking.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. For admins, that's the value they get from an enterprise perspective, to be able to, create that set of things. And for smaller customers, there is a lot of like a ready-made set of tests, so they can just run it. Like if you see the comments that I usually get, this is the most value I get for going from not knowing anything about my tenant to running this script, and in like 5 minutes I have this detailed report about the health of my tenant, and it's a good ROI on, like, if your security suddenly became important, it's a good place to start for lots of.
It's a very interesting project there. So it's straightforward to set up and install and get running with. obviously the flip side of an open source project is if you start using this and it's really valuable, and then you start going, oh, it should have this feature, then you might need to get stuck in and start get involved and start contributing as well, because sometimes you can look at a lot of open source projects and the comments are from people who've benefited from the free thing, and they haven't contributed the change back. They say, oh, I could do a better job than myself. Go on then, fork the project and do it yourself. So if you have a good idea, then are you open to people giving their solutions as well as problems?
Yeah, that's true. But because with the power of PowerShell democratizes the code that people can write, like they can easily get into it and start writing and sharing. A lot of people we have contributing also, they keep saying this is the first time I've done a PR, and we have the guide about how to create a PR as well in our docs. So we are trying to make it all as gentle as possible for people who have never done anything. And even the markdown, like the steps to do things, we had so many people who have never created a PR or even didn't know what it meant. We've given the steps so they could come in and just edit the markdown file for those docs. So we've built it in such a way that it's so easy to contribute.
Yeah.
And that you can see that from just in the short few months since we went live, we have like 60 plus contributors. A bulk of them are first time folks because they can see it and they go like, hey, I can fix that. It's just PowerShell. And that's been the power of this.
But if you install Git and then you commit it on Windows, it flips you into Vi, which is fine for me because I used to be a Unix admin. But there's the people.
So
I know there's loads of different tools and ways to do it, but the standard Git install, like on my machine, I committed something and I'm like, why is this using Vi? Because I usually do it in VS Code. So if you just do, you clone it and then you want to. I said it can be a bit of an unusual experience, if you're not used to dragging and dropping things or uploading stuff. So I can understand that because I was on my phone or something like that at the time when, and trying to remote to my PC. And I was like, this is not a good position to be in because why is it doing this? But then again, I've been using Nano on Unix since I was about 20.
Yeah, we've given steps where you don't need to see the CLI to submit a PR. So GitHub Desktop does a really good job. So you just use GitHub Desktop as your interface. You click the browser, open GitHub Desktop. You can create the change. You have an open in Visual Studio button. You edit that, then you can create the pull request. So I never spend any time on the command line when I do Git.
That sounds like ClickOps to me. I've never installed it because I'd just be like wing-get install Git, and then bam. So I'm hit the keyboard up.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm trying to make it accessible to a lot more people who have not done this before. Yeah. And so
I can understand.
Command line scares it for them. So this.
But if you weren't scared by the command line, and then you're suddenly presented with Vi, and you've never used it before, and then you'd be like, because I don't I uppercase A, which is the one, and okay, and then I was on Unix and then tried to do it the wrong way, thinking I was on Vi. Yeah. And then I was like, oh no, I can just Control X and save this because it's in Nano. I'm sorted. It confuses the hell out of me, and I still don't understand how it all works. I can only do it on my own projects, and I'd also fear submitting a change to somebody else's project because I'd be wondering what happens to my change if they don't like it. Do I lose my change? And so all of that is someone that can just about work Git clone, Git pull, Git commit, Git add. To manage some of my own code. I can understand how it could seem complex to other people, but I'm also taking away that I should probably install GitHub Desktop.
Yes, 100%. Well. You should. 100%. It's a lot more gentle introduction. It's a lot more easier to teach people to get into contributing to open source.
Yes,
through that.
That's my task for the week, I suppose. Everyone else is looking at all this stuff from Ignite, and I'm like, right, now I can commit my code without confusing myself to my own repository.
So
I've learned something at least. GitHub Desktop.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance, Merill. You have a lot of other projects too, and I didn't want to negate them. I just was more interested in Maester myself. That's all.
Yes, absolutely.
But you have what? ID Power Toys, Graph X-Ray, and what? Command.ms. Could you give us just a 2-second on each of those, so everybody knows what they are? Because I mean,
Yep,
Maester
CMD.
obviously is powerful and useful, and I think there's going to be a lot of downloads after this layer. So,
absolutely, yeah. So CMD.ms is, you can just type it in and go there. It's a way to get into the portals. Like sometimes it takes 10 clicks to get to different portals in them. So even knowing where to go, so you start memorizing these short links, and you can just type it. Say, like if I want to get into this conditional access blade, I type entra.ca.cmd.ms, and I'm in there. Or if I want to get to the Azure VMs blade, I say azvm, and I'm in there. So there are like hundreds and hundreds of those that you can commit to memory. Or people, I know some people just have that as their homepage, and
sure.
they can just search and click and get to the blade that they want to without having to click through so many blades in the portals. So that's cmd.ms. Graph X-ray is like Fiddler for Graph, and you could do things in the portal, and it'll generate the Graph PowerShell, even C# and JavaScript code for you. So you don't need to find the docs to how to automate things, right? You know how to do it in UI. Within seconds, you get that in PowerShell. So it's a Chrome extension that you install, and you can try that out. Yeah, I have a whole bunch more. I do a weekly newsletter at Entra.news. So if you sign up for that, I keep sharing about my different projects. It's more to highlight the community around Entra. It comes out once a week, and it's a way to quickly scan. Like within 5 minutes, you can scan through all the headings, and if any of the articles interest you, you can then click and read them. So it's a very quick way to stay on top of everything that's happening in the Entra security side of things for M365 admins who are really busy with so many other things. So if you do one thing, I would say just sign up for my newsletter, and I'll be sharing tips on all the other tools that I build off of that. I have some cool mind maps on Entra.news as well, so you can check that out as well.
Awesome. It was great. Appreciate you being here, Merill. It was a good conversation. I appreciate you introducing everybody to Maester. I'm sure, again, there'll be lots of downloads after this, and look forward to Ignite next week, and or I should say this week. I don't know.
This week,
whatever
today,
time it is.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with Paul Robichaud, where once we've had time to actually digest and go through and see the reality of some of the announcements and get into the nitty gritty, we'll be talking through what actually got released, what actually arrived, and what's coming soon, and do a bit more analysis in. But thank you very much, Merill, for joining us on the show today. It was an absolute pleasure. While we've been talking, I've installed GitHub Desktop, and now I'm going to be managing repositories like a pro.
All right.
Awesome.
I thought I'm all elite on Unix. I'm clearly not. Actually, I say I use all this stuff, and I know how to use Vi and all that, but then I don't actually know how to manage the repositories. Yeah. I can use the and I'm using the wrong tools. That's that typical system admin. Continues to do things the way he's been doing things for 20 years.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to break those. Hard to break.
Oh, well, I'm sure people can relate. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I've enjoyed it so much. And yes, so there's so many different places to find your stuff. So obviously there's Maester, which there's a link for, your GitHub, which is a good starting point for a lot of the stuff that you do, which is github.com/Merill, your websites as well, which will put a long list of about 50 different places to go and find you. Thanks again for joining us.
It's been a blast, and I've really enjoyed my time, and hope your listeners learned at least one new thing. That's always what I wish
they did.
People come off it. So it was so good to have this long chat on Maester. Looking forward to releasing version 1 in the next few weeks.
Thank you. And of course, thank you for listening to the show at home or wherever you might be. And you can, of course, join us again, as I said, in a couple of weeks' time, and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or of course on practical365.com.